On the line, we have one of our favorite conservatives in Congress, Congressman from Louisiana's 4th District, Dr. John Fleming. Doctor, great to have you with us.
Well, John, thanks for having me on, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, we appreciate that, and we're fired up to have you on, and I know you were up late last evening, so we had to hustle you up today from being there the wee hours of the day. We're trying to figure out, Congressman, basically the great McConnell sellout of 2013. I know you voted no. 85 Republicans in the House voted in favor of this. What exactly did Republicans get out of it?
Well, John, it's a little bit mystifying. You know, we've kind of started this discussion and debate right after the president won re-election. Speaker Boehner came up with this Plan B idea, as you may recall, which would have theoretically cut taxes for everybody making less than $1 million a year. And it begins with a semantic argument. It begins that we actually ignore the fact that we've had 12 years of Bush tax rates, and that we wake up one morning and our tax rates are actually the same as the Clinton years, that, you know, Bush was never president and Obama never signed into law the extension of the Bush tax rates for 2 years, and that we wake up in the morning and we have Clinton tax rates, and all of a sudden we decide to cut those tax rates for everybody making less than $1 million, or in the case of this bill, less than $200,000. And so the semantic argument is, well, I'm cutting taxes by voting for this bill. But John, you know, you just mentioned that your show is one of common sense. Common sense tells you that if you voted for this bill, you voted to raise taxes. And you voted to raise taxes on people who in many cities today are actually in the middle class, because in places like New York City and certainly Washington, D.C., somebody who makes $200,000 a year with a high cost of living is still really in a middle-class framework. And then beyond that, with inflation, many more people will be in that category very soon, just as the AMT sucked a lot of people in that vortex as well. And then going forward, small business owners are going to be definitely affected, and they're going to be considering laying people off as a result. So I don't see any way you could say this is a good thing for taxpayers. I don't see any way you could call this a tax cut. That's a purely semantic argument. My constituents get it. They understand that voting for this would have been voting to increase taxes, and it only begins with this. The president has made it clear that he has more in mind for tax increases.
The other concern with this is the bill that passed last night actually increased the debt, did nothing to address out-of-control spending, and kicked sequestration 60 days down the road. We now have to go back in 60 days. You've got the other debt limit issue coming up. When are Republicans going to try to figure out how to work with the president in a meaningful way to get spending under control?
Well, it starts, John, with a president who actually wants to do that. There is no indication, despite the rhetoric coming from the White House in campaign speeches, there's absolutely no evidence that President Obama has in any way taken interest in cutting spending. He, as soon as it looked like this was going to pass, remember that President Obama went out on stage with some campaign supporters right there in the White House or next door to it in front of the cameras, and they cheered him on as he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, look, I'm getting these revenue increases for free. You know, we're going to need them for spending. And if you guys wanted to talk about tax cuts, meaning Republicans, we're going to have to talk about more if you want to talk about more spending cuts, we're going to have to talk about more tax increases. And remember that Obamacare taxes go into effect the first of this year as well. That's $1 trillion. That hits the middle class right in the face. And then we've got this additional taxes from this, and that now the president is already talking about additional taxes. I'm not sure what he's got in mind. Maybe he's talking about a VAT tax. But this president made plenty of campaign promises in the area of, for instance, let's cut $3 for every tax increase we have. But when it actually came to time to get it done, it's clear he wants more revenue, more spending, more programs, more government.
We're with Louisiana Republican Congressman Dr. John Fleming. The fact that Senator McConnell got involved in this thing in the final hour and kind of put this deal together between himself, Harry Reid, and President and the Vice President, do House Republicans feel that they were basically cut out of the process at the end?
Well, it's interesting, John. We have a saying on the inside that for us Republicans, that Democrats are our opponents and the Senate is our enemy, and I think that proved to be the case here. We were prepared to put up some real resistance on this situation, and then when we saw that the Senate passed it, within 10 minutes of actually receiving the bill, a 150-page bill, the Senate, on a very large bipartisan basis, passed this, then we knew that there was no way we could put up any significant resistance. I'll take you back a year ago when we had the payroll tax issue.
Right.
The Senate passed that. It was a 3-month extension. We insisted on a 1-year extension of the payroll tax cut, and it be paid for. We had a good bill that we passed and sent over to the Senate. They ignored. And so we held out. Remember, we stayed during the holidays. We were in front of the cameras. And not only were we hit by the mainstream media, we were clobbered by conservative media as well. And so it's very clear that any kind of resistance House Republicans try to put up to the old Washington ways, including that's occurring in the Senate, even among Republicans, we're just simply going to be cut off at the knees. And so, last night we saw, the end was near. So we just simply let this thing pass with mainly Democrat votes, try to keep as many Republican fingerprints off of it as possible.
Congressman, 85 House Republicans voted in favor of it.
Just based on the arguments I heard them make on inside debate in our conference, one point that they make, and I think is a good one, is that the cuts that do occur with this are now permanent, and that's going to be a big problem for Democrats in the future. They're not going to be able to come back and say that, for instance, the AMT fix, which is now indexed for inflation, the estate tax, which did get increased a little bit, but fortunately it's not too far off from where it was under the Bush rates. Now that's permanent. We don't have to worry about that expiring. And so they make the case that it could have been a lot worse, and now this has passed us and it's in permanent law. And then they also go on, to make that semantic argument that we started with a baseline of the Clinton tax rates and that this is certainly better than the Clinton tax rates, and I would agree with that. But I think, again, the average citizen out there, and I've had a lot of discussions, I have a very active Facebook, it's very clear in their mind that this is a net tax increase. So I would disagree with my colleagues who voted for it. But I do get their argument. I just simply don't think that at the end of the day it holds water. It's, again, more kind of Washington double talk. And if you'll notice, most of the people who did vote for it among Republicans were from places like California and New York, much more liberal-leaning areas, and also people who've been in Congress for a number of years and maybe, in my view, don't communicate with their constituents quite as much as maybe some of the newer members do.
Congressman, where do conservative Republicans go from here?
Well, it's a very difficult hill to climb for conservative Republicans because really caught by surprise by the outcome of the presidential election. If you really look within the numbers, you look at the exit polls and why people voted the way they did, basically conservatives didn't show up the way we expected them to do. And secondly, Americans were not really demanding jobs the way we thought they would. I mean, with an 8% unemployment rate, you would think Americans were screaming for them. But instead, we have had bailouts. We've had unemployment insurance extension, unprecedented. We've had payroll tax cuts. We've had all sorts of ways to cushion the downfall of people, and of course, putting that on the deficit and debt, leaving the tab for our grandchildren. And it's apparent that we've crossed a threshold in America that Europe has led the way in, and that is that we choose benefits rather than jobs as a society. And that makes it a very difficult uphill climb for conservatives, because we can warn, and we've been warning for years, and everybody knows that the deficit and the debt continues to grow. But Americans are not ready quite yet to come to grips. It's going to take, I'm afraid, some economic calamity before we kind of sober up from the party that's been going on with, again, the growth of government benefits and programs that are increasingly more expensive, and there's no way taxes are going to cover this. So I'm afraid that's the bad news I have to report to you. America's going to have to sober up from the party.
I can understand where you're coming from with that, Congressman, because in this whole debate, no one is talking about any real spending cuts, which at the end of the day, that's the issue. And we're not even talking about it in any meaningful way. Congressman, I got about a minute and a half. The Republican conference leadership was split down the middle on this vote last night. Is there going to be a potential challenge to Speaker Boehner in 2013?
Well, it's interesting. I'm asked that question a lot, particularly in the last few days, and notably after the divide in the way the vote came down last night. I will say that there was no whip on this vote. In other words, no one within the Republican Congress urged us to vote one way or another. We were all left to our own conscience as to how we would choose to vote. And so the fact that Speaker Boehner voted one way and McCarthy and Cantor another might suggest that there's some split in leadership, and there could be some type of trend towards replacing the Speaker. Internally, I'm not aware that there's any move to do that, but I do see more and more reports and more specific reports. Something came out in Breitbart last night saying that 20 members already have a plan to do that, which would be when we vote for Speaker, I believe, on Friday. So I would tell you, as someone who often votes and departs from the Speaker on voting record in a much more conservative way, I'm not aware that that's happening, but it could be that I'm just not in the loop on that. It'll be very telling on Friday if there's any attempt to do that.
We can't thank you enough, sir. We've been speaking to Congressman John Fleming, a physician from Louisiana's 4th District, who was in the thick of it. And we thank you, by the way, for your time before the holidays when John and I were up on Capitol Hill, sir. We appreciate the time and certainly your insight on what was a very troublesome thing for many Americans and specifically conservatives moving ahead after the vote last night.
Well, absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be on with you today and to speak out about these important things. There's a lot more we're going to have to deal with. There are more cliffs ahead, and we appreciate the great work that you guys are doing there with your radio program.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year, sir.
You as well.